Dr. Joshua Rosenthal. Very excited to have him as well. He's a great speaker too, and his topic, the Mitochondria Connect, is something that I and many of the ILA board members have expressed a lot of interest in knowing more about. So over to Joshua.
Hey, how are you? Thank you so much. That was a fantastic talk. Dr. Bruno's talk was fantastic. It's a great lead-in for me because I think some of the stuff, hopefully I'll try to also connect for some of the listeners who said, what was that? It was very exciting, but I'm not sure I understand it. And I think some of the details in my talk may help, so that'd be cool.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So, hey, quick question before we jump into all the beautiful information that you put together for us. Tell us a little bit about your journey. I'm always curious to know how you got to where you got to. You're a medical doctor and who's focusing now in this field. So, tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you got where you did.
Sure. I'm a board certified in both otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and also sleep medicine. And I would say my journey has two components, both a professional component and a personal component, which of course, you can't separate the two.
Yeah.
But from a professional standpoint, being involved with sleep medicine, which is a tremendously exciting and interesting field, I think my interest was mainly from a sleep apnea standpoint. But as I, learned the field and got more knowledge, I realized this is a really fascinating story about brain chemistry, switches, and getting things to work at the right time. And it's ultimately a game of timing. And, our bodies work on timing that's in the seconds, fractions of a second, you can't even imagine.
Right.
But the one easy part here is, in being in practice for quite some time, for a sleep medicine doctor, there's really one test. It's a sleep test. So everybody comes in, you end up with a sleep test. So it's kind of a great evaluation because there's a lot of information. But what I found over time was that people would come in. They, of course, had a real problem. And why is that? Because they told me so. I ordered the test, and a lot of them would have findings, and that was great. And then they would go down a kind of, knee-jerk algorithm of treating them. And that's wonderful. And we can make people better that way. But then what about that 20, 30% who the test was normal? And I say normal with air quotes for those who are listening to this and can't see me, because I think if they were normal, they wouldn't have a sleep problem. They wouldn't be telling me it's terrible. So that I knew I had to find something. And in my own, professional curiosity, I felt a bit like a failure to tell someone that everything was normal when I knew they had a problem. And then I kind of was losing sleep over trying to figure out what was going on. And so the great irony, the sleep doctor with a sleep problem, because he can't help all his patients. But the truth is that curiosity drove me to look at all these tests very carefully. And over time, I started to see the combinations of problems that this group had. They had a lack of deep sleep. So that we talked about the brain waves, getting into a delta brainwave, a slow brainwave, regenerative state, dream sleep, the lack of dream sleep. And so there's no pill, no thing that we do. There's no ICD-9 or 10 code to diagnose. I don't have proper sleep architecture. And I recognized that this was a problem. And so I started to investigate a little more. And so then this gets into my own personal story, which I think the slides, I have some pictures, which maybe we'll go into that because I could show you, is that in my own personal story, my training, being a resident and being up all night, especially being in a surgical field, it's terrible for your circadian rhythms, your body clock. And so, I gained a lot of weight. I got up to 220 pounds. And of course, when I graduated, I said, well, now I'll have time to deal with this and I'll be able to eat right and exercise. And these are the secrets that we learned in the 15 minutes of nutrition and nutritional information. And so actually, if you put up the slides, I'll show you. I think that'll help and I can get into that.
Sure.
Of course, though, well, I know how to exercise. I know how, I was involved with wrestling and so I know what intense exercise is. And next slide, please. So, when I graduated, that's me, that's hard to believe. That's my face. Might look a little younger, but it's a lot wider and chubbier. And so Unfortunately, I probably had destroyed my circadian rhythms. I'm sure my cortisol my adrenal glands were pretty stressed out. My thyroid gland was probably underactive from being overstimulated. And so that's what happened. And I didn't really know how to fix this except eat less and exercise more. And I did that, and I had some success. And of course, because I'm a surgeon and we're pretty intense people, I was able to kind of what I'll call starve myself, because that's really what dieting is. And I lost weight, but I looked terrible. I got down to my fighting weight from I graduated in high school, and my own parents thought I looked like I had cancer. So this was not a healthy looking weight. So I ended up having to gain about 20 pounds back. And I looked better. I didn't look, like I had a disease or something. But then, next slide, please. Then because, so this is what I did. I did the traditional, next slide. I did the traditional story. And then, because of my professional life, looking to try to figure out what's going on, I was doing a lot of citizen science on myself. I was using something, I don't know if Jeffrey's heard of this, called the Zeo. It was a headband EEG that was a consumer level, like alarm clock. And I was playing around, how do I change the architecture of my sleep? Because nobody's really doing this. And so that's how I started. And my curiosity got me deeper and deeper into trying to interfere with how my sleep came out every night. And then one day, on the bottom left here, this is a neurologist, I think she's in Texas, by the name of Sasha Gomanak. And I was on YouTube. I forget what I was looking at in the corner. There was this video and it said, sleep apnea, migraines, and vitamin D. I didn't know what the heck all three of those had to do together in the same talk. And so I watched this talk, and she talked very heavily about how vitamin D receptors, which are actually all over your entire body, happen to also be in the part of the brain that controls headaches and the part that controls sleep. And she found that when she gave very high vitamin D replacement to a lot of her patients, people would get rid of their headaches and start to sleep overnight. I found this fascinating. And it started, more wheels turning. And of course, when you really get into this, I'll save you the trouble of all the things I did in between. But really, what is vitamin D? Vitamin D is a light story. So these $10 glasses on the right that make you look like a spaceman were what I then used to get down to the same weight that I had gotten down to, about 165 pounds, which is what I graduated with, except this time I looked good. I didn't look unhealthy. I didn't look withdrawn and gaunt. And I got stronger looking. And then I checked my labs. My hormone panel was better. And I hadn't done anything different with exercise or with food. So this really blew my mind, because all the stuff I was reading, this is what it said, and I did it in myself. And then that's kind of how it moved on. Next slide. So ultimately, when I started looking into this stuff is not new. It seemed new to me because, after $250,000 on my training and 5 years, of indentured servitude, I found out there's a whole world of information. And this goes back into the 50s. And we had John Ott, the Health and Light book there, which I recommend to anyone who wants to learn just a general introduction into how light really affects the neuroendocrine system. And even think Dr. Bruin did a great job about showing how it really connects to emotions. All this information. And you have Fritz Holwich, who did great work showing that after cataract surgery, when they didn't replace lenses, when they took out the lens, we changed the frequencies of light that go into the eye, and they had totally different endocrine systems. It changed their glucose, their insulin, changed all kinds of things. He measured this in urine, he measured this in blood. And then we have all the Russian work, and Roland Van Wyck, this book, Light and Shaping Life, does a very nice job of summarizing about 100 years of amazing research that's been done with biophotons from Fritz Popp and all these people that really had groundbreaking work at the time that most physicians have never heard of. So there's a whole tremendous amount of great literature here for you to read if you're interested. But the bottom line is it's all about biophysics and what doctor is being taught about physics. Because I didn't know anything about electrons or protons. I mean, obviously I learned some basics, but I didn't know how they really work. And I certainly didn't realize that light, water, and magnetism are really the drivers of a lot of our advanced physiology, the reasons that we can't explain why you can have a reaction faster than the conduction of a nerve, why your heart cannot pump at a strong enough force to go through the resistance of all your blood vessels. Where is the force of that movement coming from? And it's all light generated, because light and water, and that's a plug for Gerald Pollack's book on the top left, light and water can do amazing things when you put them together. So all of this sent me on a totally different journey, what I'll call like a new medical school, which is really biophysics. Next slide, please. So that is a tremendous story. And this is the bottom line of what I realized is there's two major factors in health that we've missed. One is circadian rhythms, because they control everything. And then two is circadian rhythms are really a light story, because we talk about Zeitgebers, as you know, they're the light bringers, they drive the circadian rhythms. Well, what light are we exposed to, and how does this system work? We don't talk about that enough, but this picture is the summary, in my opinion, of where we got it wrong, okay? If we look in the back, we see a spectrum of blue to red from left to right, and the sun has all the colors, like a well-balanced meal, so to speak. And then we created light bulbs. You can see LED incandescent and compact fluorescent, which do not look anything like that, okay? And incandescents kind of are more even with a more right-sided red-heavy spectrum, but you can see that LED and compact fluorescent have big spikes in the blue and the green. And actually most of the light is actually more blue than red. And there's actually an absence of red. You can see the red
Joshua,
drops out. Yes.
sorry to interrupt, just a quick clarification that's coming. So you corrected your vitamin D levels with sunlight or with yellow glasses or with like 60,000 IU per week or something?
So yeah, to start, obviously, I was listening to this talk, and so you can very easily supplement vitamin D at a very high range and improve your vitamin D status very quickly. Is that as beneficial as getting it from the sun the way you should? I would say there's a lot of data that suggests no. So while supplementation can be good and has benefits, vitamin D is really more of a hormone than a supplement or a nutritional factor. It's something that you have to get right. How you get it right is, obviously that depends on your circumstances of existence, how you can garner the sun. And there's a lot of things about that are required to harness the sun properly. And most of us as indoor living people don't have those parts intact so that we can go out and really just get good vitamin D.
Great.
So I hope that clarifies.
So, but did you do it with?
I started out with supplements, but then I quickly, as I dove into the science, I realized that this is a light story and that getting it through light was going to be a lot better for me. And the reason it's better is because it does a lot of other things, because as Dr. Bruno was talking about, all these different frequencies matter. And so again, what does this picture show us? That the sun has all the frequencies in it. And when you subtract out a lot of the frequencies, that missing information, because that's really what light is. Light is information and instructions. It's also energy, but without the right information of how to use something, you can't get anywhere. And I think what people don't realize, and I certainly didn't, is that every protein in your body has a three-dimensional shape and it's its own electromagnetic antenna, if you will. And these chemicals that Dr. Bruno referred to, when he said these light, capturing proteins, chromophores, this is why we see the polyphenols and why is red wine good. These are all chromophores. These are all fluorophores. These are all things that absorb and emit light frequencies. And so they can take and harness and then convert and deliver light in different frequencies to your body. So it's essentially a ferry system. And if you have light that's missing all these frequencies and your body is deficient in the ability to generate these frequencies, you're going to be in trouble. And it's even worse than that, because the circadian mechanism, the way it is developed, since it's connected to your neurohormone system, basically you can start to have poor hormone function. Poor hormone function in itself is a problem and can generate all kinds of issues. Next slide, please. So this is what I realized. Well, what are the signals that we're all exposed to? And most of us, it's poor overhead lighting and it's screen time. And this is one of the reasons that the pandemic has been poor for both health and psychological, mental, emotional health, as well as physical health, because we're spending more time indoors, less time outdoors. And so we're driving ourselves towards a very strong frequency of light that's without all its complements. And so unfortunately, most of the artificial technologies are very blue light frequency heavy. And it turns out our body decided to use that frequency to tell time. And so blue light changes during the day, the color temperature changes from morning to sunrise to sunset. And that change in both blue and purple light is how our body fine tunes and understands what day, what time, and what season we're in. And unfortunately, midday sun on a summer midday sun has a color temperature of about 5,000–6,000 Kelvin. That's the same color temperature of your screen that you're looking at right now. And so it just so happens that now might actually be that time of day. But guess what? When you check your email or your phone or whatever at 10 o'clock at night, that is not the color temperature that exists, because the sun went down sometime before you looked at your phone that late at night. And even still, the color temperature is very different. And well, so basically, we're sending instructions to our body and our brain that it's not nighttime. And of course, the key component is going to be melatonin. Melatonin, of course, its greatest suppressor is blue light. And melatonin controls a tremendous amount of things in your sleep. It's one of the greatest brain antioxidants around, so it's going to help to detoxify your brain. It's an aromatase inhibitor, which means it lowers estrogen. Somebody who has breast cancer should know that estrogen in too much in excess is not good, and that contributes to cancer. So this is a connection. This is a connection to all kinds of epithelial cancers that are out there, prostate, breast, thyroid cancer is a great study that just came out showing that artificial light at night is associated with an increased risk of thyroid cancer. And of course, our necks, female necks especially, are exposed. So let me go through that. You can go to the next slide. I'll go through just how that mechanism works. And this is what seems like a complicated slide, but this is very similar to the slide that Dr. Bruno showed, in that we start out with light at the top left going in the eye. And then in the retina, that's one of the first places that we knew that we have melanopsin, which is the blue light receptor. It turns out that blue light receptor also happens to be in fat tissue. We found it in blood vessels. We're probably going to find it in every organ in the body, because this is the day-night timekeeper. And unfortunately, it would seem when we talk about circadian rhythms that, you just tell the master clock in your head, and that's the SCN, or suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is where the clock is shown on this picture. It seems like, you just get that right and that's okay. But guess what? Every cell in your body has a clock, and they contact and communicate and talk to the master clock. And it's really no different from the way your clock works on your phone. When daylight saving times happen, you don't go on your phone and change it anymore. It connects to a server and checks to see what time it is before, and then it says, there's been an adjustment. So your body communicates on an electromagnetic level on this same way, and it talks to this master clock. And if your master clock is off, the other body clocks have to be off. So you start by getting the master clock right, and you hope to get those other body clocks right too. But the way the signal works is that, after it goes to the body clock, the master clock, the SCN, it then goes to the hypothalamus. It also has connections, to the thalamus, but the hypothalamus can then talk to our pituitary gland and signal for all the hormones. So this is how, you can have thyroid disease. This is how you can have adrenal fatigue, is that if you have a constant blue light signal stimulating your paraventricular nucleus in the hypothalamus, you're constantly telling yourself you're under stress and under fight or flight mode. And so you're constantly in that programming. And how do you decrease that programming? Well, you want to have your parasympathetic mode on. But again, you can't out meditate if you're constantly, doing things that'll put you in parasympathetic, if you're constantly living in a environment that's stimulating and overdriving the sympathetic nervous system, so the fight or flight. So this system connects deeply to your psychological, emotional, physical, endocrine well-being. And so if you don't get this right, you really can't get anything else right, because it's that much harder. And so this environment thing, the light signals that you're around, and it's not just light, because the bad news is we've shown that electromagnetic frequencies and radiations from phones and stuff also lower melatonin in a similar way that melanopsin does. And it turns out that, of course, melatonin, these rhythms, they're also connected to the mitochondria. And when we talk about, next slide, please. When we talk about, and so this was just this slide was just to show, I forgot that this pituitary gland, which is basically programmed from your master clock, goes to everything you could think of. So every hormone, your sex hormones, your testosterone, to your ovaries, your thyroid gland, your bones. So this is a huge problem when you get this wrong, and the timing of secreting these things and how much to make is totally off. Next slide. So, and this is great. So you'll appreciate this, Dr. Bruno. So, we look at these aromatic amino acids. Well, phenylalanine, tryptophan, and histidine, these are known as aromatic amino acids. And that aromatic part refers to the hexagon on the left with double bonds that make it a particular configuration. And that configuration absorbs UV light. And so it turns out, if you look at the pathways here, these chemicals make melanin, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. They make melatonin, serotonin. What are you getting from this? These are all the neurotransmitters that run our biology. And these are really important for your brain and your brain health, as well as your overall health. Next slide, please. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here, those same chemicals are listed. And these slides are from Alexander Wunsch, by the way, who's a fantastic physician who's talking about light. I would consider him one of my mentors that I've never yet met. I do hope to meet him at some point. But so this slide shows that what is the absorption of light of these amino acids? This is in the 200 to 300 nanometer range. That's UV light. And UV light is completely absent indoors unless you have a particular UV light bulb that you specifically bought, because most of the full spectrum lights that we have, that we don't have the full spectrum light. That's really the problem, is that we don't have full spectrum. So we're missing, and glass, of course, blocks UV. So even if we're sitting by a window right here, which I have, I'm not getting any UV light unless I put one on in my room. And so these amino acids determine your brain chemistry, and they're programmed by light that you don't see. So how is that going to help your brain? So you see there's a problem. And so it turns out there's a lot of things like this in the body, and they're programmed by light. And so the frequencies of light tell, and you can see that different chemicals absorb slightly different frequencies of light. Next slide, please. So this is the key here. This is really the key. And so the mitochondria is the bridge between two worlds. When I started out my personal journey, the other part is I started reading a lot of things when I realized that I was missing the information, and a lot of energy medicine and things that I didn't understand. And I wanted a scientific explanation, because I'm pretty curious. And this is the answer. The mitochondria is an electromagnetic receptor. It determines timing information. It has the ability to make free radicals. And those free radicals, people think free radicals are bad. Free radicals are further programming. It's a chemical translation of those instructions from light to tell the body what to do. The right amount of free radical gives you the right result. Too much creates damage. So we live in a world that's so toxic that we're creating tremendous amounts of free radical damage. And we have this overstimulus of the wrong information. So of course, how can these poor mitochondria translate that information properly? But what do? They control all these fancy terms that maybe many of the listeners don't know what they mean. They control your health. And ultimately, what do? They control how your body metabolizes food, how your body performs, how your hormones are, and how you think. If you have too much or too little of these neurotransmitters, you may be more worried, you may be more anxious, right? And so this is what the whole pharmacological treatment of mental and mood disorders is involved around, changing these neurotransmitters. Well, they're all programmed by light and circadian rhythms. So we can control them by putting ourselves in a better light environment. Next slide, please. So, this really went awry a long time ago. I don't blame all the lighting industry, because we did this as soon as we put on clothes. Our skin and our fat and our blood vessels have that blue light receptor. So as soon as we put on clothes, we started blocking that signal. And the other thing is that UV light has very little penetration on the skin and requires that direct contact for us to absorb it. And so already you can see, the natural human on the right really only has their wrists and their neck and face exposed, versus, our ancient ancestors, which were walking around near naked. So our ability to absorb the light is very low when we live a clothed indoor life. Next slide. And of course, as I showed, the lighting going from candlelight to current LED technology, is deficient in a lot of the important frequencies. And luckily there is, a movement towards getting more full spectrum light and lighting that doesn't have such great blue frequencies at night. But we really have to do a better job, and we have to be aware of that. Because in other words, when you go to Home Depot and get another light bulb and you don't realize that that's actually something that can affect your health adversely, got a big problem. Next slide. So this is kind of a pictorial description of the problem, is that, if you're at work and you look overhead and you got those fluorescent lights, this is the spectrum of light from left to right, purple to red. And you can see there's a huge spike of blue between 400 and 500, that's present. And unfortunately, those frequencies of light create some natural damage in the mitochondria. And the antidote to that is red light. But let me ask you a question. Look at the right side. What happened? The red light drops off. And that's why the sun has a nice wide spectrum of red and infrared light, because that offsets some of the damage that the blue intentionally causes. And nature used that damage to her advantage when she created us, but those two have to be present. And so what we've done is we've subtracted out the red and increased the blue. And so that ratio has been altered, and that's creating a mismatch, and then our mitochondria has to translate. And so next advance. So that problem right there in that 400 to 500 range is when we have that frequency, not only during the day when it's without red, but especially at night because of how it blocks melatonin and continues to create damage. Next slide. We need to protect ourselves. So a simple, this is how I started. These are these goofy glasses. I don't wear those goofy ones. I have more stylish ones now. But what you can see is they block particular frequencies. And if you look now, you'll see that from 400 to 500, there's a complete absence of light. And so now I can control my environment of light that's going through my retina into the master clock of my head. And by doing that, I can now start to create melatonin. That will all of a sudden change my circadian rhythms and allow them to adjust over time, allow my hormones to adjust over time. That will protect me from a lot of this, free radical damage. And so this is, the starting point. This is how I started to get yourself back in sync and in line. And of course, the one other crazy part of this is that the mitochondria are like a battery and they hold charge. And as they break down, they lose the ability to hold charge. And it just so happens that the chemical that allows us to rebuild our mitochondria and control that is, of course, melatonin. So here we are again back at the fact that not only are we destroying the batteries that run our physiology, but we're destroying the chemical that could actually repair them. So it's really actually twice as bad as we think. And I think that's why if we look at the health problems, they're rising exponentially, because this is a feed forward problem. We're not only destroying our circadian rhythms, we're destroying our abilities to get out of this problem even faster. Next slide. So, what I started to do is wear these funky glasses. Now I recognize that that's not what everybody wants. So yeah, just here to see, there are glasses that you can wear that are more appropriate to, be seen in public or be seen by people. And actually Lucia Eyes is a fantastic website and company. I know the owner, but basically because they're doing it for kids and adults. And this is really, I think the kids are at the biggest deficit here, because these are unmyelinated brains that are being exposed to these frequencies. And we know, and I'm sure Dr. Bruno would agree, that a lot of these things are wiring very early on, and we're exposing these children to unnatural frequencies. And so the neural foundations of how we wire these neurons together are being abnormally kind of created and kind of more permanently fused in that way. Not to say that they're damaged forever, but this is a major problem because it's much harder to change these programmings once they've been established. And so, getting adults and children, and there's glasses for daytime and glasses for nighttime, because we have different needs about how we want to work with blue light in both of those circumstances.
Very interesting.
Next slide. Yeah, so and this was just how to get in contact with me. I teach people how to do this. Obviously, as a physician, I can't have a physician relationship with everyone unless they're in a state that I'm licensed in. But obviously, a lot of this stuff is lifestyle and learning how to do things a different way. And so that's something that, I'm happy to help people with.
That's fantastic, Joshua. So there are many questions that have come in directly to me and on the group. So let me start with the question that I've been dying to ask, which is, what is the feedback that you're getting from the people that you're working with, and how do you work with them? For example, if I take an appointment with you and I say, let's make up an ailment. I have plenty of them, so just make one up here.
Well, so
And
hypothyroidism, how's that?
yeah, okay, let's do hypothyroid. And
Yeah.
so I come to you. What would the process be like?
So I've stopped working from a kind of a la carte visit basis and more to a kind of all-inclusive basis. I think we can do things in a step-by-step, but how much can we do in a single session, and is that enough? I mean, it's that compliance of coming back, and so knowing that you have a certain amount of time to work with someone, I think, is the ideal situation. So, but obviously that's not for everybody. But it's piecemeal. Since this is lifestyle stuff, you can't just go from 0 to 100. You've got to start somewhere. And so just a small change, and just starting to get some of these rhythms in effect. I mean, I could think of a patient who has pretty significant patient I'm working with now, hypothyroidism, a lot of adrenal fatigue, really energy has been destroyed mainly by her profession. She's a nurse, and terrible brain fog, and even symptoms she didn't even tell me about. Her brain was just hurting, pain, tingling, numbness, headache. And in just 2 weeks of making some of these first elementary changes, she said to me, God, I feel like my brain is draining. Something's draining out all the stuff that was clogging it up. And so we forget that, again, in our sleep, that's when our brain detoxes. We have what they call the glymphatic system, which is similar to lymphatic. And it's a detox pathway the brain has at night that it kind of shuttles out all the bad exhaust fumes. And we lose this when we destroy our sleep. And so again, here's another way that, God, we want to detox. We hear a lot about detoxification. If you don't have good sleep, you don't have good detox. And of course, the liver is a circadian based organ. So its ability to detox is based on your timing too. So you got to get that right to get your liver to work better.
Sure. So if I came to you with hypothyroidism, and I understand that you don't do this a la carte, like, hey, this is what you're getting, this is what you need. It's a holistic approach. But would that be like sessions that would be once a week with you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I like to. I think the relationship with the patient, and even Dr. Bruno talked about this. There is a thing, and he put Light, the therapist, and the client, and you can say doctor, patient, and Light is the binder. I mean, right now we're actually communicating via light signals. And if I was in your presence, I would get even more information because I'd really be reading your biofield and your electromagnetism even more so. So, there is a necessity, I think, to have that kind of close-knit relationship, because you could get a lot more information non-verbally as a practitioner a lot of times, and that information is invaluable. And so just someone say, I'm doing well, I'll see you next month. When you talk to them and you see their face, you get extra sensory information.
Sounds good.
So a close-knit relationship, I think, is really important as well. Yeah.
Understood. So this next question, Joshua, is I'm going to paraphrase what I read here. Is it possible to treat vitamin D deficiency with sunlight for somebody who has had cancer that's been cured in the past? So, cancer survivor, is it possible to treat vitamin D deficiency with sunlight alone?
So the answer is it's an environment question. I mean, this is really what makes the type of medicine that I practice today much more different, is that epigenetics dictates that we have to fix the environment, that you can't get well in the environment that made you sick. So by definition, a cancer patient lives in a toxic environment. Now, environment doesn't just mean like what neighborhood are you from? We're talking about your latitude. We're talking about, what's the population density? What do your neighbors have? Do you live next to a cell tower? Do you have an alarm clock next to your nightstand? that is actually giving off a high electric field? Do you have, so there's so many hidden, because light, visible light is the only part of the electromagnetic spectrum we can see. So we haven't talked about all the invisible parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. And these also talk to our physiology, whether we realize it or not, because again, everything's an antenna. And so, we're taking this information, and unfortunately, if we give those bad, instructions with a cell phone or a bad magnetic field, we're going to have inflammation and disease as a result, rather than if we can get the natural signals properly. So some people could literally be naked outside every day and not make vitamin D if they live in a toxic environment. And that includes the toxic chemicals and all the other things we're exposed to. So this is, this is a very broad problem. But yes, the answer is it possible? The answer, of course, is yes. You might have to start with some supplementation at first as you clean up the environment, because the environment may take you quite some time to fix.
Yeah, it's a fantastic answer. Thank you. The next question that has come in is daylight. This is very interesting. Daylight has all the colors. So why do we need to block anything or block any wavelength?
Oh, yeah. So, and this is where it gets confusing, is that most of the stuff that I'm talking about, when I talk about blue blocking glasses, I'm talking about indoor living. When you're outside, you want to have your glasses down and you want to actually get the full spectrum into your eye. Your body pumps a lot of blood through the retina. And so literally you're radiating that blood, through your eye alone. So a lot of times, I'm walking around with clothes on. I'm not usually walking around half naked like my desired state would be, in a tropical area. So having your eyes do a lot of the work, glasses, lenses, contacts, all these things disturb that spectrum. And so you have to get that spectrum right. And so outdoors, you don't want anything blocking the light from your eyes or your skin. Indoors, you need to know what your signals are and what's appropriate to block. You do need some blue light during the day, which is why blue light glasses like the ones I'm wearing now, you probably can't tell. They're not blocking all the blue light. I don't want to block all the blue light. It's daytime. I know there's blue light naturally out. So this is how you can fix that. But the details matter, because physics is nonlinear, which means that a small change up front can have a huge end result. So even they say, well, what's a little blue light from the computer screen? Well, look at the health results. And it seems like, what's a little blue light? Well, it's exploded. We have a health crisis that's beyond, we have an opioid crisis. Where did that come from? Well, I'll just throw a little hint in. Light programs the gene called POMC. POMC stands for pro-opiomelanocortin. Opio sounds a lot like opioid. It's because that is our natural endorphin, our natural opium that we make in our body, and sunlight makes it. And what happens when you never see the sun and you play on a PlayStation all night long and destroy your circadian rhythms? We have kids in an opioid crisis. That's the worst we've ever seen, with suicide, and as this connects to the psychological implications of the neurotransmitters that I talked about.
So moving on to the next question, do you prescribe melatonin to your patients?
I don't believe in oral melatonin. I think, this is essentially a hormone. It's something you have to improve your natural production of. I think there's a lot of information about melatonin now, particularly with the COVID crisis, because melatonin affects the mitochondria, and that's important because people that are susceptible to COVID severity are going to have low mitochondrial reserve, and we don't have a great way of testing that. That's why it seems so surprising when people are getting sick, because we didn't expect it. But the truth is just like any other hormone, if you take a lot of it, you're going to suppress your natural production, so that's not good. And then two, your receptors can get like fatigued. Unfortunately, we make a very small amount of melatonin, probably less than 1 milligram. It's very hard because we'd have to go in our body and, go into the brain and measure it. So there's not great studies. Over the counter, you're going to find, if you're lucky, you'll find 3 milligrams. It's hard to find that. It's mostly 5 and 10 milligrams. And if you look at the protocols that I've seen people talking about for COVID and different things, they're going way above even that. And so again, there's a danger in that. It's like high dose steroids. You can shock the adrenal glands. And so there's dangers in using that medically. And I think we'll find that probably will pan out, that people say, hey, you got to be careful with melatonin. But I don't believe strongly in that. I'd rather you make it naturally.
Fantastic. So down to our last 3 questions. Is there anything special to say about 500 nanometer turquoise within this context?
So yeah, the worst the worst blue light frequencies are from the 400 to 500 nanometer range. That being said, 500 is right at that changeover. Green, so that's all blue frequency. Green light, which is now going to go 500, and up, even up into red light. Red light has a small suppression of melatonin. So even red light, which I often advocate as illumination at night because it doesn't suppress melatonin, even red light itself has a small melatonin suppression effect, nowhere near what the blue light does. So, yeah, and again, we're just talking about the circadian rhythms effect. I think, the prior talk, I think elucidated that, look, colors of light can also impact other systems. And so I'm not talking about that, but there are, again, the same way people talk about eat the rainbow. I want you to see the rainbow of colors. I want you to get them all. The sun's got them.
Beautiful, beautiful. I also want to say that a few weeks ago, probably a couple of months ago, I'd hosted another talk called The Sleep Math with Dr. Mariana Figueroa, who's part of the Mount Sinai group. And I think one thing I would love to do down the road is have you and her as part of a panel with Jeffrey and others who are connected to this whole topic, where we can do a 2-hour session with topics that are common to all of us. And I mean, there's so many questions that are coming in. It's fantastic. There's a lot more to be done here, clearly. So we do have a few more questions, and let me just get to this one that came directly is what is your what is this big project that you're really excited to start on in the near future? I wanted to ask that of Jeffrey also, but
Sure. I mean, based on all the things I talked about, obviously this is a great departure from a lot of what I do. I mean, probably the things that I'm working on now, one is I'm really, I tell you got to change your environment. I just taught you that. And so one of the things is, how do you know what your environment is? And so even though I'm a healer and a practitioner, I think becoming a doctor of the environment and treating the environment is really the next step. And so there's so much misinformation about how to shield and protect and measure electromagnetic fields. I mean, one of the things I decided I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing that myself, because I have the physician knowledge from a clinical standpoint, but there's also a physics knowledge. And those two often are not being put together in a proper way. So people are just saying, oh, do this, do that. And from a physics standpoint, it may work, but from a healing standpoint, may not be in the best interest. So I'm actually just kind of starting to endeavor out into doing some of the electromagnetic testing, on site in my geography in Long Island, New York. And so maybe that'll expand to, the tri-state area at some point, but I'm just starting that. And I'm trying to keep myself open for all kinds of different projects, because I think this information has to get out. Anything that can get it out is a really valuable project to be involved with.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really good to know. Really good to know. Thank you for sharing that. I think we'll slip in one more question, because it's kind of exciting. Why are we so careful about using UV light in daily indoor lighting? And as I understood, UV is also important for a circadian rhythm, question mark.
Yeah. So I'll just say that unfortunately, I think UV light has gotten a bad rep. It's a lot of science behind why that is, but one of the first studies that came out that talked about UV light causing some eye disease was not of the sun. It was of an artificial light bulb. I think that's an important distinguishment that should be made when we start saying all UV light is bad, but then we're using an artificial light bulb as the determinant of whether we say the sun is bad, because the sun has UV light, but so does the artificial light bulb. And so they may not be the same. And I think you know better than I as well that there's a lot of other details with light that has to be determined, specifications to understand if it's the same. And you can't just say one UV light is the same as the other. Talk about flicker, we talk about all kinds of different issues. And so, UV light also has, we have also a receptor in our body, or a chromophore called neuropsin. And neuropsin is a UV light receptor. And so that's how our body really tells seasonal time. Daily time is more of a blue light thing, but seasonal time, if you think about it. So here in New York, spring has certainly not sprung, but we're trying to see some action in that direction. The UV index is increasing. So that amount of UV light, both UVA and UVB, is how your body determines what seasonality it is. And those have different purposes. And as I showed you, UV light, is what programs a lot of things in your body. And so your ability to make and store and use UV light becomes really important. UV light can be dangerous. If you're a really light-skinned person and you go out in August and get fried, I'm not recommending that. We've lost what sensible light exposure is in this society because we've been so hidden from the sun for so long.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right about the skin tones also. The common myth is that a person with my skin tone can't get burned. That's not true. Try driving and open top in Florida down to the Keys and see what happens. Yeah. It won't take, it doesn't take long, a couple of hours and you're like a lobster.
But, we know what's interesting is it's a skill that you can teach your body to do, but it requires a constant exposure. And the problem is we go out in little spurts.
Exactly.
So that's the problem, is that we have to go out every day. And so if you go out in April, May, and June, then August sun won't burn you. If you don't go out for all those months and then go out in August, you're going to get French fried.
Right. Yeah. And that's where the lifestyle question that you brought up comes in, that you can't just take a la carte, take a pill and you're done. It's more holistic. And that's why sessions with you would mean a more interactive exchange to have a bespoke response to the ailment, as against saying, here, take a pill and see you later. Well, it's fantastic. I'm so thrilled by both of you. I'm sure the guests are as well, with the number of questions that have come in and the attendance today. So thank you again, Joshua and Jeffrey, for taking the time to be with us. For all of our guests, thank you for being here with us. We are truly appreciative of you taking your time, whichever part of the world you're in, to be with us. And we would be back in 2 weeks. This episode would be going through post-production and on YouTube in a week. But do join us in 2 weeks. We have another 5 episodes left this season. Every 2 weeks we'll have one episode. And stay tuned. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Consider becoming ILA members. And keep sending us your feedback on how we can do this better. So thank you again, and we will see you very soon. We will open up the mics now. We're just trying something new today. For those of us who know each other, or even other guests who may have questions for the next 5 or 7 or 10 minutes, we can open up the mics and get questions directly. Anup, can we do that? And thank you for the team that is putting this together on the back. We have Anup in New Delhi and Justin in New Jersey, working on the back end of it so that everything runs smoothly, and deeply appreciative of their time as well. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments?
Well, I just want to say thank you to both speakers and to Joshua, because he's also going to be joining the North American chapter of ELA, and we are thrilled because he will be a great mentor for all of us, and he has a lot to teach. So I just want to welcome him publicly to the North American chapter of ELA.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I appreciate that. I will say that the one exciting thing is there's such a wide variety of practitioners, in this group. And what's exciting to me is this is kind of how I started my personal journey, is reading a bunch of stuff that I didn't know what the heck they were talking about, using words like chi and prana and vril and all this stuff that means energy. And as a scientist, I felt like this is not acceptable. And this is why we bash all these other fields. And I'll use acupuncture as a perfect example, is that the meridian system and all this stuff. We said, well, we don't know how it works. Well, guess what? In the 1970s, a guy by the name of Robert O. Becker, one of the books that was on my slides, he proved how acupuncture works. He proved the entire Chinese meridian system from a physics standpoint, and nobody heard it. And it should have created that buzz, like this is the validation, but unfortunately, again, it's just not, with the narrative of what we're doing. And so, and it takes so long for these things to catch up to mainstream medicine. But, chiropractors, acupuncturists, they're all affecting electron flow. They're creating DC current. And I don't think a lot of the practitioners even know that's what they're doing, and that's okay. It still works, but it helps if we can kind of get, the hardcore scientific community, which I'm coming from, to understand it so that we can actually change people's minds and work together, because I think we all have something great to bring.
Sure. Hey, Jeffrey, what is that one project that you are really looking forward to working on?
Well, thanks. I appreciate you asking that. When you told me that question may be coming up, it made me want to think big, like there's a lot of projects I'm interested in. But if I really think big, what excites me about light medicine, and I do really think planetary medicine is where we all need to be considering more, and having the interdisciplinary inputs of an organization like ILA helps bring that global perspective. But I would, what popped in my mind was the Bardo project. And what it comes down to is, we're here on the planet for a short period of time. And within certain traditions, like, Tibetan traditions, they talk about beginnings, transitions, and endings affecting consciousness. And I'm one who believes consciousness is primary to our whole journey here. And I would love to see light used in birthing to help with the early entrance of people coming into life experience. I would love to see light used more in when people are going through difficult transitions in their life. And I would love to see light being applied to death. I think there's a huge opening for utilizing light therapies to help people have more conscious dying. And I think if we can really work at there's those big points, I think we can bring up human consciousness more quickly.
What are the modalities of what you just spoke about, especially as you kind of go towards your departure point?
Okay. I'll give you one example. I had an opportunity of a friend who was dying in the hospital with colon cancer, and your family was sending out messages, and it got to a point where, if you want to say goodbye, she's, expected to die very shortly. So I went to the hospital. I brought my little light on a pen, from color puncture, and some aroma essential oil. And when I got there, she had been in a coma for a period of time. And I applied a little bit of the oil and used some color to stimulate joy, and just applied color to her and spoke to her. And she ended up waking up, ended up having 3 more. She got out of the hospital in about a week, had 3 more months of life, and then transitioned in a way that she felt like she really was able to have more completion. When people are dying, oftentimes we hide death, we numb death out. People like in the COVID hospitals are dying without connection to family members. That is so barbaric. There should be ways to assist people to make a conscious transition, help reduce pain. And I think that's a huge opportunity for the light community to look at applying light to help transitional states.
That's fantastic. Jeffrey, that is really fantastic, because it's just given me an idea for another talk with our friend Carolyn Jones, who's here in Brooklyn. And she works with, people who are leaving us, and using modalities that are slightly different, not light and color and oils, etc. But a little bit of oil. So we'll talk about this offline, because I think it'll be fantastic connect for the two of you. This is great. Well, anybody else with questions?
I am from Toronto. This is Uttayan from Toronto. Hi. Hello. Yeah. It's interesting that light is influencing the human being health and well-being. Without light, no living being on earth. We agree that. So basically, when we skip completely daylighting, sunlighting, can we survive under the sun, under the artificial light? to generate all these vitamin D, whatever the hormones required for the human survival? Is it possible, like such as vitamin D, under the artificial light?
Would either one of you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. The answer is, the short answer is no. The long answer is you can try to do things to improve your artificial light environment for sure, and there are better choices, but there is no current device that I know of that really can replace the sun and what it does. The characteristics of light that come from that big ball are just difficult. But there are definitely improvements that most humans have that can make major improvements because we live in such a really toxic electromagnetic environment. So the answer is you could do better, but if you really want to get it right, you have to be careful because, you know, while there are some good devices, they may work better for people that are more broken. And as you get healthier, you may find that there are some small technical issues with that are going to limit your ability to get to the next level if you want to, you know, really get to ultimate, you know, state of health. So it's complicated, but yes, do better. But, you know, the more you get out in the sun, the better you generally will do because you're going to get more of the good stuff.
The question behind sorry to ask second question. It's a question behind my reason is right now the COVID issue came up everywhere. And some of the scientific research indicate that vitamin D deficiency is one of the things to prevent the COVID or maybe the treatment of the COVID as well. So that's why, you know, people saying that, especially like people living in the northern hemisphere, like countries like Canada, USA, or even Norway and Scandinavian countries, where the winter is one of the time that we have a lower sunlight exposure. So at that time, the high peak COVID patients are there. You can see the graph from the New York Times or any other website and see the country COVID patients, number of COVID patients during the summertime, very low. And it suddenly came to peak September, October, November, December, and January, because they're saying there is a vitamin D deficiency. So I was thinking about whether instead of sunlight lower, we can have artificial light to treat them, or maybe increase the vitamin D level. So which creating the immune system stronger, so to fight against the COVID.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's very good studies showing that when you stratify patients by the vitamin D level, people with vitamin D deficiency have more severe, and people with high vitamin Ds either don't get it or have very mild disease. Sure. You can absolutely, obviously, raise vitamin D with a light bulb. That's called a tanning bed. And again, there's UVA and there's UVB. We need UVB to make vitamin D. And so not all tanning beds have UVB bulbs. They may have a UVA bulb, which will give you kind of a melanin tan response, but may not make vitamin D. The other complicated fact is that, again, you know, making vitamin D requires your mitochondria to make a very specific type of water when they're functioning properly. And as your mitochondria break, you lose that ability. So it's, you know, you can potentially do things to improve your vitamin D with light, and it may not work. And that may be because you have another health problem you have to fix before that. But, you know, the problem is, again, a lot of these light bulbs, you're getting other disadvantages from, you know, so again, if you look at any flu charts, they're always seasonal. And that's because as the UV changes, it changes and modulates your body and your abilities. And the one other part that I think humans have gotten wrong is, you know, cold, you know, people that like Eskimos and, you know, people that live in the cold, they get cold. We live in heated boxes where we modulate temperature. And so, you know, that temperature modulation may be comfortable, but cold actually supersedes your circadian rhythms when light is not adequate. And so actually getting cold in the winter is a good thing. And cold itself, if you look up Wim Hof, has its own amazing things that it can do for your physiology and neurotransmitters and your immune system. In fact, Wim Hof is a guy who's known as the Iceman, gone, you know, I think he climbed Mount Everest in a pair of shorts. And he's gone, you know, on freezing water for extended amounts of time. And he actually was injected in the hospital with bacteria to show his immune system could fight. So again, there's a lot of missing pieces here, and it's all physics that biophysics that we have not really established. So getting cold is your offset in time when there's no light.
Yeah.
We don't do that either. So getting cold is good, and getting light is good.
Right. So
Thank you.
thank you, Joshua. Utan, thank you for your question. If you drop us a direct line, I will also link you with others who could work with you on the COVID situation. We've been spending a lot of time focusing on that within the ILA and outside. So just feel free to contact us, and I will make sure that you're connected. Then there was another one comment which is beautiful. And where is it? Where is it? Can we talk about sound with light as well? Yes, we do. Many of our sessions are connected with sound and vibration. And in fact, this other talk show that I host, which is every Thursday. Tomorrow we are doing a show on harmonics for health. So you're welcome to join us. It's called AWA Agora. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing when you say I sing light. I would love to hear more on that. So please drop me a direct line. I'm just putting my email in here so I can get you the information. Right. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm starving. So should we wrap it up?
You didn't get enough light. You got to eat light.
I get good light. I get good light. I just need nutrition. I just need food. I need rice.
Well, this was fun. I've totally enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful, wonderful program.
Bye, guys.